Chapter 2. Why don't you set the stage for where you are at this point in your life? Last we left, you were on a wild and mad journey from Chicago all the way to sunny California.
So here I am at this apartment building, sitting on top of a hill, overlooking the Monterey Bay, with an unobstructed balcony view, which, these days, who knows how much that costs? But back then, it was in what was known as the surfer slums or the beach flats of Santa Cruz, which was, unless you were a surfer or a freak, was a high or a minority person, usually Mexican American. That was not where you wanted to live. So it wasn't where the rich white people lived. Let's put it that way.
Right.
But it was like, as far as I was concerned, a street kid from Chicago with a beach view, I was like living in heaven.
Yeah, it's exactly where you want to be.
Yeah, and it wasn't a dump. It was like a really nice building. The people that owned it were cool. The manager was cool. Like, he was one of us. He partied with us all the time. So, I kind of landed in this place in a building full of the type of people that I went looking for, as I pointed out. So, it was kind of magical. So we would meet people that showed up new to town, and it seemed to be like some kind of weird energy was like, and I don't mean to sound new agey, but this is how it felt. There just seemed to be a lot of cool people started showing up from back east. A lot of people were from back east.
Well, I mean, what does the term energy really mean in a new agey it's energy is the ability to do work, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's just been overused. So
for sure.
Yeah, so I'm kind of
in a very real way, it was there was an energy there. There was a bunch of people of similar persuasions all showing up and with an ability to do work,
Well, and if you look at history is full of these episodes where groups of people gathered together in places and did phenomenal things, but nobody's quite sure why they ended up in those places at the same time.
Yeah. No, it seems to be a real ass thing.
Yeah, it happens again and again and again throughout history. This was one of those times at one of these places we didn't know what it was going to be. And in fact, as I've pointed out, at the time it was happening, we weren't sitting there processing, oh, this great thing is happening, and we're in the middle of it. You do that later.
Right.
When it's all over and the wonderful things have emerged from that gathering, then you look back at it and go, oh crap, there was something, we were being set up for something, and it happened. I was thinking about Ralph Abraham, who was a member of this clique that was hanging out in that building at that time. He's known as the father of chaos mathematics, and he taught at the University of California, Santa Cruz. He was a friend of the Formal Association group. He was a friend of Nina Gerboy. Nina Gerboy actually worked for him for a while. I worked for him for a while eventually.
Oh, word.
Ralph just wrote a series of books fairly recently about Hip Santa Cruz, as he called the series. He's looking back at it and going, okay, there was something going on. And it was going on before I got there, but I kind of landed right as it was doing a crescendo. And so there was all this stuff going on, and I'm not the only one that looks back at that time and says ooh, something was definitely going on. You can look up Ralph's books called Hip Santa Cruz, and he goes into some of the history of why people, who was there, what they were doing, why they were there, as far as he can tell. And I just point that out because I'm not the only one to note that there was something definitely going on.
Yeah, for sure.
The one thing about Santa Cruz at that time is there was a good ratio of unusual people that were hanging out in the city at that time. And what we didn't know was the .com thing was just getting ready to happen just over the hill in Silicon Valley.
Right.
And when I say over the hill, that's what we called it, over the hill. So you went down Highway 17, which went over the Santa Cruz Mountains, over the summit, and then when it came down the other side, it was in San Jose. So it literally went up the mountain and then emptied into Silicon Valley, as it's known.
Yeah, yeah.
So all the stuff that became famous, Mountain View for Google and, Sunnyvale, for Sun Microsystems, and all the things that became famous, we called over the hill.
Yeah.
And when you went over the hill, you went into a different world. So like Santa Cruz basically walled off from the world by this mountain range and this ocean.
Right.
So like there was like this kind of U-shaped mountain range that walled us in, and then like to the west was like the ocean. So like it was you came over the mountain, down the mountain, and you were on the beach, and there was the ocean. So as Timothy Leary pointed out, he thought that the reason Santa Cruz or California had so many strange, unusual, unique people was because they had gone as far west as they could go, and the ocean stopped them. and so we all piled up on top of each other at the beach.
Yeah.
And he's kind of right.
Well, one thing I've noticed, like, is that this hip Santa Cruz, I guess a good term for it, seems to have been kind of overshadowed by the Silicon Valley thing, and it kind of sort of got like wrapped up. And as far as like pop culture goes, and as far as like, you know, people my age looking at like influences and stuff, and like counterculture influences and shit.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think there's anything to that, or was I just like not on computers enough? Or
well, the thing was, like, we're talking about the late 80s.
Yeah.
And so the Apple thing was happening. The PC thing was starting to happen.
Yeah.
It was still, I think Windows 3.1 was around. It had just started to be around, like mostly DOS, but Windows 3.1 was a thing. It was around. So I was working on PCs and Mac. I think I got my hands on my first Mac, I want to say 1984, I'm pretty sure. By 89, you know, the Macintosh revolution was beginning to happen. And so the creatives had really got their hands on the Mac and said, this is our computer, this is our platform. Especially because the PC was mostly DOS at the time.
Right.
And there wasn't a whole lot you could do with graphics on the PC yet. There would be. You know, like everybody that was doing anything creatively was working on a Macintosh. Even John Warnock, who was developing PostScript, which allowed you to print things the way you saw them on the screen and not just like this ugly dot matrix representation. You know, that was all Mac related. Everything was Mac. If you were creative, you were on the Mac. If you were working at a bank, you were probably working on a PC or something like it.
Interesting.
And so most of the people that were doing the most creative, interesting things in the Macintosh arena worked at Apple, which, you know, like was over the hill, Cupertino.
Right.
Literally just over the hill. And then you were like right there at Cupertino. But they usually lived in places like Santa Cruz. And in some instances, there were people that were living up north in Mill Valley. And so they were outside of San Francisco where the most interesting things were happening.
Yeah.
And so Santa Cruz was a bedroom community for an awful lot of people that worked at Apple.
Yeah.
And so you had that in the mix of everything else that was going on with Santa Cruz. So you had like this really dynamic mix of people who were non-computer related, artistic, spiritual, yoga, you know, like all the things that were going on there.
Yeah.
And then you had all the computer people as well that crossed over. There was a lot of crossover.
Which is a thing that I don't think people really, I guess, appreciate that much, is the relationship between computing and like information science and spirituality and yoga and stuff like that.
But there was back then, and even now, with like a little bit of it still retains its, like, if you look at the people that go to Burning Man,
right, a
lot of those people are tech people,
right,
from Silicon Valley.
I mean, it's like, I don't know, it's just imagining Santa Cruz at this time is wild for me. Like, you guys were very much, you were on you're at the edge of the sea on like more than one front, and it's it's fascinating. Yeah,
I mean, we were definitely on the bleeding edge of a lot of things.
Yeah.
I mean, the tech thing for sure, because I saw people doing stuff in '89 in Santa Cruz that I didn't see anybody else doing anywhere else in the tech world for years to come. There was some weird stuff that I saw that people were doing that was like way ahead of its time. And it was just, and that was the other thing, is like there was like Dan Mapes used to live in Santa Cruz. If you don't know who he is, he's a giant mover and thinker in AI these days.
Okay.
But at that time, Dan had a little house that he was renting in Santa Cruz, besides where he was living. He was not living there. Like he lived one place, and then he rented this cool little house, and it was a clubhouse, and it was just people who were into tech would come over and just bring their computers and hang out.
Mm.
And we were just it was called digital media, which sounds weird, like, weirdly unoriginal. But back then it was like digital media, like, ooh, cutting edge.
Yeah.
And so I'd go over there and hang out with people that were doing stuff that just like blew my mind. I mean, I took Bob Wilson over there one day, and I walked around and showed him all the stuff that people were doing. And he looked at me and he said, I feel like I'm like, when I go back to home now and work on my Macintosh, that I'm like hacking with a stone axe compared to what these people are doing, and it was true. They were doing stuff like you couldn't imagine how they did it, but they did it.
Yeah.
It was like really cool stuff. And nobody was doing it for venture capital, let's do an IPO. Nobody was doing it for any of those reasons. It was like, see what we can do. It was the hacker mentality, the hacker spirit.
Yeah, just exploring the space or this new space. Yeah.
Yeah, and there was a group of young people up at UCSC that I hooked up with. They called themselves Wobble, WBL, Weird Blinking Lights. And they were like some of the most amazing tech heads that I've like met in a long time. And they all went on to do great things because they were super smart.
Yeah.
But Wobble used to come over to digital media, and we would have parties, and we would sit around and like hack all day. And then like at nighttime, like MDMA had just started to like show up in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And we knew somebody that was getting MDMA pharmaceutical grade from Europe. I won't say who they were and how they were doing that, but they were getting it.
Right on.
And so we were doing pharmaceutical grade MDMA at night.
Fuck yes.
And hanging out in hot tubs and like doing house parties, what eventually became raves.
Yeah.
But we were just hanging out. It was just people who had landed in this crossroads.
Yeah.
Who found each other and said, "Oh, you're into some of the things I'm into. Let's see what we can do together."
Yeah, that was just the stuff you were doing, not. It
was very punk rock.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of cross-referencing. People were touching base with each other. Like I started making contact with the magical people in Santa Cruz. And so I started bringing them over to like digital media or to like the fog salons, or like, I started cross-pollinating the magic people with the computer people. And that was a cool thing, because the magic people and the computer people started having these great conversations.
Yeah.
Because there was a lot in common. Like,
yeah.
Most people don't know that if you're into Hermetic magic, if you're especially into John Dee, you're into things that predicated mathematics proper.
Yeah.
I mean, Dee did a lot of things, and one of the, besides, coming up with a Nokian, or he was given a Nokian, he would say, one of the things he did is when Dee got started with math was actually not something they taught in the universities. The first official formal chair of mathematics was Isaac Newton. Previous to Newton, mathematics was considered magic.
And I mean, it of course it was. It's you could call it like the source code of the universe or something,
Yeah.
What you could do with mathematics at your fingertips was something that no one else could do. You could make miracles happen.
Exactly. And so if you look at Dee, a couple of things. I mean, Dee obviously was like completely versed in magic, like up to his eyeballs.
Mm-hmm.
Had one of the best, most complete libraries in Europe. He translated Euclid from the proper Latin into the Vulgate. He was the first one to do that. He perfected mathematical methods of maritime navigation that allowed the English fleet to defeat the Spanish Armada. I mean, we're talking about a guy who was a legitimate mathematician who was also talking to angels.
Right.
And so I'm sitting in the middle of all this and going, well, I'm kind of in both camps.
Right.
I talk to angels and I'm into mathematics. So I thought, oh, well, the people that I know that are doing Enochian should talk to the people I know that are doing math. So I brought people over and introduced to Ralph, because Ralph had started to talk to me about John Dee because he was interested in not only the mathematics, but through looking at Dee's history and who Dee was, he discovered the Enochian stuff. And so I put those two groups of people together and I said, math people talk to magic people. And so they were part of the mix of this party scene that I was a part of, which was really an academic, intellectual, intelligent drug use scene.
Right.
It wasn't stupid drug use, you know.
Right.
We were using psychedelics for a reason. We weren't just like, oh, let's get high. You know, it's like, it's not about that. It never was about that.
Yeah, you guys were getting your kicks from actually pushing boundaries, not just from being fucked up. And psychedelics are a great way to push boundaries.
Yeah.
To inspire new ways of approaching problems. Yeah.
So there were things going on that were extremely cutting edge. Like if you look at Silicon Valley now, the echoes of some of that is still around. A lot of people are microdosing. Mm-hmm. Of course, they're doing it for reasons of productivity, which I don't necessarily agree with. And I'm not big on the microdosing thing unless you're doing it for, you know, help with their depression or something like that. That I'm cool with that. But you know, like the whole thing about like just do microdoses so I could be a better code writer. Nah, no, thank you. Like do some heroic doses, man, and then maybe you just like give up code writing. Who knows? So yeah, that was what was going on. There was this weird mix that probably couldn't have happened anywhere else geographically, you know, and culturally.
Right. Yeah, it was a time and place.
It's like Santa Cruz had all the psychedelic refugees. And it also was the bedroom community of people that were working in the emerging world of what was to become the internet world. But like at the time, it was just like the Macintosh world, the digital media world. And so that's basically where I found myself all of a sudden, like in the right place at the right time. And I wasn't questioning it. It was just happening.
When you think about the impact of all that on like the next, 40 years or whatever, like it's dizzying.
Looking back on it, yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Just how much like humanity itself has changed since, 1984 as a result of the internet and as a result of computing.
We were saying we were going to change the world, and lots of revolutionary movements have said that over the years.
Yeah.
I think we did it.
I think you did. Yeah.
I don't know that all of it was good.
Right.
But somehow we did do it. And then like whether or not we retained control of it is questionable.
Right.
At least for a while we did. So everything was cool. 1989, we're like zooming along, and then all of a sudden, Loma Prieta.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Yeah. It was huge.
I know nothing about that earthquake.
Okay.
I knew that it happened. When I heard you talking about it, it reminded me that I knew it happened. But beyond that, no. How
old would you have been in 89?
0. I was not. I was born in 90.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was gonna say. So I'm like in Santa Cruz was 14 miles north of the epicenter.
Oh wow.
If you saw what happened to San Francisco, it collapsed the Oakland Bay Bridge and it stopped the World Series and
right.
Like it created a lot of chaos and damage. That was 70 miles north.
Oh wow.
The epicenter was 14 miles south of Santa Cruz, where I was sitting. Had just settled down to watch the World Series, and then I heard something because I'm not from California, so I don't know earthquakes. I do now. I've been through 2 of them.
Right.
But this is my first major one. I felt a little rumble here and there, and I'm like, oh, that's an earthquake. That's nothing. Well,
yeah.
This one I heard coming down the street.
Jesus.
And I thought it was a truck, like a big semi truck coming down the street, and I'm like, this is a small street. Why is there a semi truck coming down the street? This is a tiny little street. And then all of a sudden, my building literally was going up and down.
Oh my God!
And going boom, 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 like the building was bouncing, and it was bouncing, but it wasn't bouncing off the ground and hitting it, but it sounded like it was. And I'd known enough about earthquakes that I knew I was supposed to get in a door frame. Right. So I got in a door frame. I always have a lot of books wherever I live because I cart them around, and I think I mentioned when I moved to California, I had a lot of books on my car. The chair where I was sitting was behind a bookshelf, like a huge oak bookshelf that I had found, and it was full of books. And that collapsed on the chair where I was sitting and like destroyed the chair. So probably would have done damage to me if not killed me.
Yeah, yeah.
And so immediately I went to the bathroom and I turned on the bathtub and filled the bathtub up with water. Now,
good fucking thinking.
I think, yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah.
And as it turned out, yes, very much so. and like I just went into like survival mode. I started doing things automatically.
Right.
Like bam, 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 bam. And then the aftershock started hitting every few minutes, like for a while. And so I went outside and I saw that a couple of buildings in my neighborhood had collapsed. And I was up on the hill, so I looked down into downtown and I saw there were buildings all over the place that were down. And I said, well, I should probably go down if see if anybody needs any help. So I put on some clothes, got a flashlight, a couple of things, and went downtown and started asking people, like, is somebody in that building? Did anybody check in that building? It's just like hooked up. We all like just started working together because it was that kind of town back then.
Yeah.
Everybody just like, what do we need to do? And we just started doing it. Luckily, somehow, only one person died.
Wow.
She was in a coffee house that collapsed. It was made of brick.
Jesus.
And she died. But outside of that, we didn't have any casualties. We had people that were hurt, but we didn't have anybody that was dead.
I mean, that is lucky, but for everyone but her.
Yeah, it was a bummer.
Yeah.
But it was also like extremely lucky.
Right.
Because if you went down there at the time that I went down there, the downtown area was devastated. It looked like somebody had dropped a bomb on that place.
Really?
Buildings were down, trees were down. Like it was just like cracks had formed, like just like in the movies, like, cracks had snaked down the street and opened up. And it was wild.
Yeah.
It was like everything you'd ever seen in a disaster movie had happened in the little town where I'd lived.
And it was a little town. Like that was just home.
Yeah, Santa Cruz is not that huge at the time, especially. It was like 100,000, maybe less.
Right. Okay. So.
Yeah, it was a university town, so like population went up and down based on whether school was in or not.
Right.
And so I started walking around, seeing what I could do, seeing if we could. We were like going through the rubble and calling out, see if people were there, seeing if we could see anything. And that went on till late in the night. I can't remember what time. So I eventually went back up to my house, made sure the cat was calmer. The cat was definitely not calm, but like calmer, and just like slept through the night with literally like aftershocks happening every 20, 30 minutes.
Oh, wow.
Because the earth was settling,
Right.
So that was pretty interesting and wild. The cool thing was, and I know it sounds weird, but the next morning I got up and like all the surfer people, were like gathered outside. Everybody was outside. And we started talking, and I said, well, we all have food in our freezer that's going to go bad. Why don't we have a barbecue? And everybody's like, yeah.
Yeah.
So we took wood from fallen houses.
Oh, wow.
We dragged it into the middle of the street, and we made a bonfire.
Oh, wow.
And everybody got their drums out because in Santa Cruz, everybody had a fucking drum of one type or another. And everybody got their drums out, and we started like cooking food and having a good time and celebrating the fact that we survived.
Yeah.
We're still there. We're all still alive. Most of us were not injured. The surfers, this is like my favorite part. The surfers all sat on the hill and stared at the ocean. And I went over to the guys are all lined up, and I said, what are you waiting for? And they're like, we're just wondering if there's going to be a tsunami because we're going to surf it. I'm like, yeah, you probably would try, wouldn't you? and that was a rumor for a while that like any day, any moment now, the tsunami's coming, So like we were saying, but we were way up on a hill, which overlooked the beach. So we were going to be okay. But like, yeah, literally the surfers were like sitting there like, what if the tsunami's coming? Let's try to catch the wave, which I thought was hilarious. But everybody's looking for the silver lining in the cloud.
Yeah. Well, how did the earthquake affect you philosophically? Like, was it something you had never seen before that changed the way you looked at things, or?
The reaction to the earthquake really changed how I thought about things.
Okay.
Because for a couple of weeks, we didn't have running water.
Yeah.
We didn't have power. We didn't have stoplights. Like all the things that like you'd put air quotes around and call civilization.
Right.
We didn't have.
Right.
And yet, the city of Santa Cruz did not grind to a halt.
Somehow, right?
In fact, it did really well.
Yeah.
FEMA sent us some like these big white tents. I guess you would call them tents. They were temporary structures. So like there was like this thin aluminum framing that you would put up, and there was like this white nylon waterproof fabric that you would put on it. So it was like technically a tent, but not really.
Right.
It was a FEMA structure that they sent to like areas that had, disasters. So we put up these FEMA structures, and we used to have a drum circle / farmers market downtown every weekend. And so we put up these FEMA structures, and like all the places of business that like didn't have a building anymore were allowed to move into these FEMA structures. So there was restaurants in there, bookshops, all these things were now set up in these FEMA structures. And we got this disaster fencing that we put up around, because a lot of these buildings were just now holes in the ground.
Right.
So we put this fencing around so people wouldn't wander off into the hole and fall into the hole.
Yeah.
And then we proceeded to continue life in this fashion.
Right.
So like we started having a farmer's market again every weekend. We had a drum circle every weekend. People gathered together downtown, as they always had. Downtown Santa Cruz had this street that ran through the center of it called Pacific Garden. And so the 10-block area or whatever it was where everything was downtown was called the Pacific Garden Mall. It wasn't indoors, but it was called the mall. One street over, we had these FEMA structures set up, and so that became the new gathering place. And people just started treating cross areas where like there used to be stoplights that worked. Everybody just automatically, nobody told us to do it, like just started treating it like four-way stops.
Yeah.
You'd pull up, you'd look to your left, you'd look to your right. Whoever got there first, like you followed all the rules of a four-way stop. I realized that like I went driving around one day and I'm like, everybody's following the four-way stop rule. Nobody told us to do that.
Right.
Nobody had to tell us to do that. We just did it.
Yeah. Like people will organize and reach a type of coherence and harmony. Like it will happen on their own.
Yeah, I saw this city of people working together without having to be told by law enforcement, without having to be decreed by law.
Right.
Because nobody knew where the mayor was. Like it was like nobody was looking for the mayor and asking the mayor what to do. Everybody's just looking at their neighbors and going, okay, what are we going to do?
Right.
And we did it. So for me, that was one of the moments in life. I've had several where you just kind of look around and you go, okay, you can go through life for a while and you can start to really doubt the goodness of humanity.
Mm-hmm.
But then when you go through something like that and you see people respond in a decent way, thinking about their neighbors, making sure their neighbors had food and water, making sure that their neighbors were not frightened.
Right.
All the things that you're supposed to do as a community, we did.
Yeah. So
I actually saw for the first time in my life, I saw a community respond in a sane way to an insane circumstance.
Yeah.
And I said, there might be some hope for this human race yet.
Maybe not for human civilization, but the human race.
I could care less about civilization. But the human race, I definitely had my faith renewed.
Yeah.
By the aftermath of the earthquake. And I also had my suspicions confirmed because it took the government forever to even show up.
Yeah.
And acknowledge that we were disasterized. We were knocked off the map for a while.
Right.
And I didn't see us suffering for it. That was the thing.
Right.
Like, good example. I went to the grocery store not too long after the earthquake, maybe a day or two after the earthquake, and the guy, whoever was running that grocery store, well, I mean, this was just one grocery store, and I won't say the name of the grocery store, but I went in and I picked up some cans and some stuff, and because I have this habit of like, my friends have called me a prepper, and I guess I am. I will accept that because I'm usually prepared, and I also will note that even with the supply chain problems that we just had with the pandemic, all these people that like sneer and call me a prepper showing up at my door to ask me if I had any extra stuff.
Yeah.
Right. And that was the case in this too. Like I always have a store. I always have like a bug out bag and a store of dried food.
It's good to have,
or canned food. Yeah. Okay. So like keep that in mind. It's not a crazy thing to do.
It's not.
So especially when you live in earthquake country.
Yeah.
So anyway, I show up at this grocery store and I'm waiting in line, and I hear the guy, like, because he's having to write the receipts by hand.
And
he's charging $5 for a loaf of bread. Now, this is 1989.
Yeah, Jesus.
A loaf of bread was like $1 something.
Yeah.
And I cut in line, and I walked up to him and I said, "You're gouging." And he started to argue with me, and I said, "You're gouging, and I'm coming back with some people. And if I see you charging $5 for a loaf of bread, we're going to burn this place to the fucking ground." And I came back, and he was charging $1.50 for bread.
There you go. Come on, man.
So that's the one time you'll always get that one, like 1 in 100 people that are like, they try to like ding your faith in humanity.
Right.
But then I know, like, everybody around me was like, yeah. It's like, yeah. Like, nobody agrees with this, dude. Like, I don't know why anybody's putting up with it. Because that bread did not cost you $5.
Yeah.
And we all know that we couldn't get over the hill because, like, we were literally landlocked. Like, we couldn't get over the hill.
Right.
Because, like, trees had fallen and, the road was unsafe and, like, all these things. So we were literally like, we're going to be sitting here in this area over here until they open the roads back up.
Yeah.
And luckily, Santa Cruz is surrounded by organic farms, so we had plenty of food. But to be gouging for a loaf of bread, I'm not okay with that.
How long did it take for electricity to come back?
A couple weeks, about 2 weeks.
And so the only information I guess you guys had was radio, if that.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I had battery operated radio, and luckily we had a local station that managed to get their generators online. And so they were getting information. Don't ask me, like, I think maybe shortwave or something. And I had shortwave. So like everybody was getting information. If you got any information, you shared it with your friends.
Yeah.
Basically at nighttime, we were doing bonfires in my neighborhood, and I'd go out with the radio and I'd turn it on so everybody could listen to it. And of course, everybody wanted to listen to news. And so we just listened to news every night while we were like cooking, the hot dogs before they went bad or whatever it was. So yeah, it was definitely post-disaster environment.
Yeah.
But I'm weird. I like those kind of environments.
Well, yeah. I mean, yeah, I do too. Like I don't mean to imply any insensitivity, but like catastrophe has its own sort of like weird peace that it brings, like kind of relief. Like it's a break from the day-to-day, like the regular circuits. And it's out of your control. It's out of everyone else's control. Like you are relieved of a burden that you carry throughout the rest of your day-to-day in a very strange way, but it's a reset.
Well, here's the cool thing is like all the power was off.
Right.
So you'd sit there at night and there was no ambient light.
Yeah.
There was no humming in the background of anything electrical.
Yeah.
And so we just sit there, like all you could hear was the waves from the ocean. And people would just sit there and like every once in a while I'd look over and go, "Do you hear that?" Everybody would be like, "No." But like, "Yeah, that's exactly right. That's nothing. You can hear nothing."
Yeah.
It was so beautiful. And it was, I mean, again, going to sound woo, but you could tell something was missing from the air. There was like the hum of the electricity.
Yeah.
Was gone. It was not there. And you could feel that it wasn't there. You're like, there's definitely something missing in the environment that I'm used to it being here. And then eventually I landed on I think it's the 60 cycle hum in the background.
Yeah.
Like
that makes sense.
We don't feel it.
Yeah.
We don't hear it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's that whole experiment. If you ask someone in the US to hum a note at random, I think they'll hum I think it's G. And if you ask someone in Europe to do the same, I believe it's B flat, that they will just on average just hum that, and it's because that's the frequency of the electricity we use.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So here it's the 60 cycle hum, and you didn't hear it.
Yeah.
You didn't feel it. And so it was peace. And we were on the beach, so you could hear the rhythm of the ocean.
And everyone was still working, but they didn't have their jobs.
Yeah, and exactly. There was nothing was open for business. I was working at the time I had my very first tech job. I'd been doing tech as a hobby for years, but I got my first tech job in Santa Cruz, and it was at a company that was building the equipment that manufactured integrated circuit chips.
Okay.
So I was building atmospheric chemical vapor deposition reactors, which was a method of making IC chips. And it was the only place anywhere near where we were that had a helipad. So when the president came to visit, that's where they landed.
Wow.
And they told me, don't bother coming to work because, for one thing, when you build integrated circuit chips, the chemicals that you use are highly volatile and highly poisonous. So they're we're not sure if we have leaks or if we're going to get leaks. And so nobody come in until we give you the green light, but we're going to pay you. So it's all good. So we were just sitting on the beach getting paid.
That's all right.
Yeah. And then nothing was happening. It was all quiet. So yeah, it was good.
Yeah.
Again, it was a disaster for a lot of people. It wiped out a lot of businesses, ruined a lot of people's homes, killed one person, panicked a lot of people. Because one of the things I'll point out is that after the earthquake, when they finally reopened the roads, we had a mass exodus of people that didn't want to live in California anymore.
Oh, okay.
A lot of people that had come out from back east.
Yeah.
Said, F this, we're leaving. And they did. They left. They went back east. So our population plummeted for a while, which even that was cool.
Right.
Far as I was concerned, it was quiet. All the students went home. As soon as they could, they left.
Yeah.
They went back home. So all of a sudden, half the population was in the town. Nothing was happening. It was quiet. I enjoyed it.
I understand for sure.
Yeah. The beaches weren't crowded. It's it was all good.
Now, trying to think of how to phrase this. It almost strikes me as this, you had met all these really interesting people and thinkers, and then and you were pushing boundaries on things, and then there was sort of this psychic shock by virtue of the earthquake that did, for a brief period, sort of expand the world, expand the space that you were experiencing in, literally, no hum of the electricity, no fucking work, no, sitting looking at the ocean. I imagine the world felt much bigger than it did or expansive rather than bigger than it did, before the earthquake. And, do you think that marked, a turning point in the things that you guys started to make and started to do? Or
yeah, I think for everybody, myself included, it put a sense of urgency into what we were doing. So now it was not so much laissez-faire. We were just kind of doing it, and if we did it, we did it, and we did and we didn't. A friend of mine once described it as we were crawling around under the tent looking for the tent pegs. And then all of a sudden we realized that we just need to sit down and find the tent pegs, put them in order,
right.
Putting the tent together correctly.
Yeah. Because catastrophe also, catalyzes. It's in the tarot, it's the transition from the tower to the star immediately afterwards.
Yeah. So we had a moment where we got a break, and then we saw all this stuff happening, and then we kind of went through we went through the crisis, and then we came out the other side of the crisis. with a new configuration. The new configuration, because downtown Santa Cruz like stayed that way for years.
Oh, wow.
While the city fought about what buildings we were going to allow to be built and how they were going to, what was the architecture we were going to follow. Like they got into like the minutia of all the, you know, the management of all that kind of stuff. Like, and we were just like, you know what? We've got these FEMA tents. We're good.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we just went about living our life.
Yeah.
So it changed the configuration of the city in that the tents were now the kind of the center of the communal area of the city on the weekends, and even during the week, it opened it up a little bit more.
Yeah,
because you're in this tent, and the tent was like being in a bazaar, like some Middle Eastern city bazaar.
Yeah.
It almost forced us to talk to each other more than we did before.
I'm sure you guys had, you had a lot more to talk about then too. Like,
there was more to talk about. People were more willing to talk because of what we went through. People met their neighbors on a closer, in a way that was more intimate than they had before. And so coming out of that, now you know your neighbors better.
Yeah.
And so you actually have a relationship with the people you live on the street with, more so than you did before.
Right.
Because everybody before was like, go to work, come home, go to bed, come home, watch TV, go to bed. Like everybody kind of like had their narrow little lives.
Right.
And I'm not knocking them for that. I'm like, they're doing what they're doing, civilization, but then they got like knocked out of the rut.
Right.
For weeks. You didn't have to go to work.
That will force a type of vulnerability on you. And that is a thing that will allow you to meet your neighbors for real.
And we literally, like, nobody stopped us from having bonfires in the streets for a long time. Like,
that's cool.
Because nobody showed up.
Yeah.
It's like, you really, like, that old saying, like, don't wait for anybody to come save you because, or what is it? Like, don't wait for anybody else because nobody's coming to save you. Like, literally, we lived that.
Yeah.
We were like, for a while we waited and then nobody showed up. And we're like, okay, nobody's going to show up. This is on us.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
You had, as far as people to be in that situation with, you had some of the most interesting people on the planet.
Yeah, because we had a lot of people who were like, people like me who were like, like half urban, half wilderness person.
Right.
And so like, there's a lot of people in Santa Cruz, especially at that time, who were people that like to go off and do like long distance hiking for months at a time, and have done all kinds of crazy things, and they were in self-sufficiency and building buildings and lived in a yurt that they built themselves, and like there's like all these kind of people. So like for us, it was like, okay, a little bump in the road, but we're over it.
Right.
Like I said, I've got a closet full of survival rations. What was the first thing I did after it stopped rocking the first time? I filled the bathtub up.
Right.
Why did I do that? Because I knew that water was going to be something that people were going to need. And I was less worried about, am I going to be able to take a bath? And more worried about, what are we going to drink?
Right. That is such a smart thing to immediately do. I just can't get over that. It's like what you should do, but like, yeah, hell yeah.
Yeah. Like I said, I've been a survival person like my whole life. So
yeah.
The first thing I thought of was like, well, I wonder what's going to happen to the water. I better fill this bathtub up at least. At least I'll have that. And as it turned out, that came in real handy. So I wasn't thinking about, am I going to be able to take a bath? I was thinking about, what am I going to drink? And as it turned out, one of the first things they did was turn off the gas and turn off the water, because they're like, we don't know what lines underground have been damaged. And so this water is probably contaminated. So you should not be drinking water out of the faucet. When they told everybody that, everybody's like, well, what are we supposed to drink? I'm like, you better get down to the store and get bottled water. And I've got some, so I will share. But like, I don't have enough to give us all water for who knows. We don't know how long this is going to take.
How did that earthquake like affect Santa Cruz, like psychically and spiritually?
Well, it did two weird things. One of the things it did is it caused people to gather together in groups and start doing things in groups again. And we had an informal group. It kind of bonded us like together even more, which was like, I think at that time we didn't have a name for it, but then Elizabeth Gibbs I'm pretty sure it was Elizabeth Gibbs came up with the name Formless Ocean Group. Fog, which if you ever lived in Santa Cruz, you know that every morning you're greeted by fog on the beach, which then burns off by 12 o'clock. Also, Formless Ocean Group, meaning that we didn't know, we didn't want to be, most of us were anarchists of one type or another.
Right.
And we didn't want to be bound to anything formal.
Right.
There was another group in town called the Island Group, which Bruce Eisner headed up.
Okay.
And they were a little more formal, and they had like rules and things and so we didn't care about that. We were more we're a group of people that all know each other that like to get together and talk about certain things.
Yeah.
And we're going to call this the Formless Ocean Group in a way. It's a wink and a nod to the fact that we aren't really a group.
Right.
Yeah. It's the old Discordian thing. We Discordians must stick apart.
Yeah. Oh no, I appreciate that. I appreciate that bit very much.
So we were doing this Formless Ocean Group thing. It was basically just a salon where we hung out together. Whoever was coming through Santa Cruz at the time, if they like say Leary was in town because he's going to be at Esalen, which is just up the road, he stopped over to see Nina. Nina would call everybody, said, Tim's in town. We'd all show up. That's what it was. It was just informal.
Yeah.
Sitting around, getting stoned, talking crazy stuff, being us. Yeah. And doing it kind of formless. And this was where I met Nick Herbert.
Right. So you met him after the earthquake?
I met him around the same time.
Okay.
It was he was coming to the group before we had a name. And then he just kept coming to the group. So I met him through that group.
Gotcha.
The group started before the earthquake, but then it persevered through the earthquake and after. And so it all kind of blends together for me.
Yeah. Gotcha.
Around that time before and after and during the earthquake, Nick, who was showing up at this informal group thing that Nina was doing at her place. And after we kind of formalized, we said we should do this in more than one place. And so sometimes it would be at my place. Sometimes Lynn Francis would have us over. Elizabeth and Patty would have us to their place. Nick and Bessie, his wife at the time, would show up and be part of the group. And so I had started to I didn't know who Nick was at the time. So I started to talk to him on the side about some weird things because Nick has a very surreal sense of humor. And sometimes he would say things and people would just go silent because I think he loves doing that. It's making people uncomfortable.
I should say Nick Herbert is a quantum physicist.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so he would say something and then I'd be the one person that laughed.
Yeah.
Eventually what happened is Nick and I began to talk outside of the group. And because I lived just if we were at Nina's place downstairs, then afterwards, Nick and I would go upstairs and, sit around and talk shit up there. And so that's where I became friends with Nick Herbert.
Right on. And you say it galvanized you guys into what you were working on. Was this I guess how shortly after this did you start not necessarily working on Ong's Hat, but working towards the things that would lay the foundation for that?
Well, we were getting really close to the beginning of this. In fact, all the things that led to that were already in motion.
Right. Okay.
So I was hanging out with Nick Herbert.
Yeah.
And
he seems tremendously important to Ong's Hat.
Yeah. Well, and also to me as a person. We're friends to this day. And he was very formative in my thinking because here's the thing. Nick is not really, he's not illiterate, but he's not a literary person like me. And so I was reading things. He'd come over to my house and we'd get high and I'd read him things from because I was immersed in Finnegan's Wake at that time. Yeah. And so I would read this Nick, listen to this part here. I think this has something to do with consciousness. I'd read him something and then he'd sit there and he'd go, okay, let me tell you how that fits into quantum physics. And he'd give me a quantum physics interpretation of a Joyce passage that I had just read him about what I considered to be something about consciousness.
That's incredible.
And so Joyce, using his multi-layered poetry, triggered something in me to where I said, he's talking about consciousness. I think he's talking about consciousness on one level. And then Nick would tell me, why on a quantum level, he was talking about that. Blew my mind.
Yeah.
And so as we got to know each other, he told me this story, like started to like make sense to me, like why he was such a brother from another mother.
Yeah.
He told me the story of when I think he was at Livermore at the time. Or, maybe not. He might have actually. I think he was still in school, and Jeffrey Kripal called it the clipboard angle incident.
Interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
And I've got this. You want to read this?
Sure. Yeah.
In the summer of 1960, read that.
So this is quoting Nick Herbert. In the summer of 1960, I was living in a loft in Berkeley near Rose and Shattuck and working as a lab tech in the Berkeley Radiation Lab, minding the liquid hydrogen refrigerator for the 72-inch bubble chamber, which tracked nuclear events spawned by protons from the Berkeley Bevatron, the highest energy particle accelerator of its day, comparable to today's LHC. A few years earlier, physicists at the Bevatron had discovered the antiproton and were exploring other new high-energy hadron reactions. I had just completed my first year of coursework at Stanford, was teaching a graduate physics lab, and preparing for the qualifying exams for the PhD. I was a practicing Catholic then, and was reading Dante's Inferno, the Book of Job, Chesterson's Orthodoxy, and planning to find a spiritual advisor at Berkeley's Newman Club. I was working swing shift at the Rad Lab, which seriously disrupted my sleep schedule. I had fallen in love with a woman named Audrey in San Francisco and was exploring the city's boundaries with her and her 2 roommates. At that time, summer of 1960, the only mind-altering drugs I had ever experienced were legal and ethanol-based. The bedroom in my loft had a small window with a view of San Francisco Bay. I was sitting on my bed in a t-shirt and sweatpants with my back to the window, getting ready for sleep one night, when I suddenly heard a voice in the empty room. "Hello, Nick." I turned to the window, but no one could have climbed up the sheer wall and spoken through the panes. The voice was inside my head. "Hello, Nick." The voice was male, a middle-aged man, spoken in a matter-of-fact way. The man, who I will call Tony, did not identify himself and got straight to the point. "You are reaching a crucial stage in your life, Nick, and must make a choice between 2 careers. 2 kinds of life await you, and I am asking you now to choose between them. One life will be regular, understandable, and conventional. The other will be unusual, unpredictable, and unconventional. Both of these lives are good lives. Now choose between them." "How can I choose?" I told the voice in my head. "Tell me more about these lives." "You know all you need to know," the voice replied. "Now choose." "Tell me more," I pleaded. "Make your choice," said the voice in my head. And so it went for 5 or 10 frustrating minutes. I wanted more info. He wanted me to choose. "All right," the voice said and vanished. I got the sense that Tony had other obligations that night and didn't have the time to waste with me. I was shaking all over during this encounter, and my clothes were soaked with sweat. What the hell was that, I thought. I did what any scientist would do. I went to the library. I found that people hearing voices was not uncommon. More than 10% of folks have heard voices, and now I was one of them. This experience gave me a sympathetic ear for people whom I met later in life who reported hearing voices too. Being a sophisticated scientist, my first assumption was that Tony was a part of my subconscious, and that I was simply speaking to myself. However, the experience didn't feel that way. Tony felt like a real person, different from me, with a distinct personality. From his tone of voice and manner of speaking, Tony came across as a regular guy, a butcher or a bus driver, who was now working as some sort of discarnate bureaucrat. I call him an angel because he was a discarnate entity, but far below the level of God and the saints. If I was making Tony up, I was doing a great acting job. It really worked. The guy felt real. A second argument against my making this up was the utter ordinariness of the transaction. If I possessed an unconscious need to star in some fabulous drama, why not invent some Egyptian king, wizard, or holy man to talk to? Why did I make up ordinary Tony and not Hermes Trismegistus? I marked this experience as unsolved and went on with my life. But 3 years later, I met Tony again. In 3 years, a lot had happened. I had been accepted for the PhD program. I had uneventfully ceased being a Catholic. I had come within inches of losing my life in a climbing accident on Mount Shasta. And thanks to some dear friends in the Stanford psychology department, I had experienced LSD, a big dose. I was then living in Los Trancos Woods, a semi-rural area in the hills behind Stanford, and had just dropped acid for the 3rd time. I was awaiting my sitter. In those days, we always had sitters to provide ground control. But my friend was delayed waiting for a pie to bake. So for the first part of the trip, I was on my own and exploring the sensual distortions, the merging with the walls and scenery, and the philosophical paradoxes that a few mics of this mind medicine can be counted on to produce. What I didn't count on was that in the middle of my trip, Tony showed up. "Hi, Nick," he said. "Same choice, no new information." "Okay," I said. "I'll take that strange life." Given the context, it was obvious what path I had already chosen. "Thanks," said Tony, noting my decision on some invisible clipboard. Sometime later, religion scholar Jeffrey Kripal dubbed this experience the clipboard angel. My angel vanished, and though I have since had a few more episodes of voices in my head, none of them ever behaved like Tony.
So he told me this story right after we had been talking about Joyce and consciousness and the quantum connections to the keys of consciousness. And at this point, Nick did not know that I was doing Enochian conjurations.
Okay.
And having success. So he told me this story, and I just like said, "Oh," in my head.
Yeah.
You've met a kindred spirit. You've met a brother.
Yeah.
And the fact that we already got along, because he's a clown.
Yeah.
But he's a clown with a sense of irony and a sense of subtlety. That, like I said, sometimes he would say things at the formal social group, and I'd be the only person laughing.
Yeah.
Because I was the only one that got what he was saying.
Yeah.
Because he was saying it in a way so that I don't know why he did it that way, but like I think he mostly did it so he could be a smartass and not necessarily get caught doing it.
Yep.
So he made some snide thing, and like it was funny, and I would start laughing because I would get it. I'd be like, I know what you were doing. It was funny. And so that's what we bonded on, was the fact that I got his jokes.
Yeah.
And then as we got to know each other more, I discovered that we had a lot more in common than just the jokes.
Right. It's always been really interested in how some people seem more primed to have like experiences where the thing they talk to, the entity they talk to, shows up as like a regular person and not like an Egyptian wizard and stuff. Like I don't know if you've noticed this too, but like it seems to be kind of two different types of people. One that will, maybe it's because, or at least I've had some very strange experiences, never with just a person that shows up like a person. Although maybe I have, who knows? I just didn't notice. Yeah, it's something that's just like always fascinated me, because I always hear these stories of like strange things showing up as people, and it's something I've never experienced.
Yeah, see, that's all I've experienced.
Interesting.
Is the angels show up and they're just like a bookshop owner. You know?
Yeah.
Or a dropout quantum physicist.
Okay, well, yeah. Now, if we're talking about angels like that, then I've definitely met them, you know?
Yeah.
Things that have like, in a psychedelic trip that have given me novel information are always like mind-blowingly fucking enormous and weird and shit. And I always wonder if it's a thing where like I might be the type of person that wouldn't take a regular formed thing giving me information, or if someone else might not take if Hermes Trismegistus had showed up to Nick Herbert, would he have taken this wizard seriously and listened? Or did he need to see someone with a clipboard at that stage in his life?
Yeah, I think he did. And so if I've learned anything over the years in working with discarnate spirits and the information they transmit, it's different for every person.
Right.
It's tailored
right
to the person. It's tailored to your personality, to your psychological makeup, to what's happened to you recently, what's happened to you in the past. It's like literally just tailored to you on a molecular level.
It reminds me of like subtractive synthesis in terms of like synthesizer, like instrument music synthesizers, where you take a pure signal and then you subtract things from it to get the pure quality of the sound. And like the human mind, like the person works as a filter, as the resonance knob, as the LFO, all the things that give the sound the unique timbre that it has, versus just like a pure sine wave or square wave or something. Like you're taking things away to make it, or filtering things to make it unique.
Well, I mean, you're dealing with something that I don't want to put too fine of a point on it, because you just don't want to do that.
No, you shouldn't.
Yeah, because then the magic goes away. But you can, as George Hansen says in The Trickster and the Paranormal, you sneak up on this stuff sideways. And so I'm going to sneak up on it sideways by saying that it's some sort of intelligence that is both subjective and objective at the same time.
Right.
It's part collective unconscious, part your unconscious, and part something else.
Something higher order.
Yeah. Something that has agency on its own.
Yes.
That makes the connection through your subconscious.
Yeah.
Speaks to you in obviously dream logic, because that's the level of your mind that it's working on and where it's drawing the information to know what to say to you and how to say it and how to appear. And so different people get it in different ways. For me, I get high-level synchronicities. I get weird cut-up messages. I get hair-raising specific I Ching draws.
Yep.
Just really specific.
Yeah.
So that's the language that it speaks to me in.
Yeah.
Because that's my language. Because I'm an artist, and that's my art. That's my language.
Yep.
And so it uses the language of art and the language of dreams to speak to me, because that's my language.
Right.
Other people, it probably has to do something different to get your attention.
Right.
It does it for me. That gets my attention. Like, okay, I'm paying attention.
Right.
And so that's how it works for me. And so Nick, being who he is, got a guy with a clipboard.
Yes.
And
being a Catholic at the time too.
Yeah. Yeah, and he got a bus driver or whatever.
Yeah.
He got what he needed so that he would listen.
Right.
And he did.
That's so interesting.
And he luckily got a second visitation, so he got a second chance to actually make a choice, and he was ready at that time. Again, draw this into the Grail analogy. Parzival runs across the Grail fairly early when he leaves on his journey, doesn't recognize it.
Right.
Spends a fucking lifetime looking for it, only to realize I already saw it.
Right.
I need to go back where I started. That was Nick. Nick had a Grail experience.
Yeah. Interesting. So, were you working on art at the time?
Oh yeah. I mean, there's never been a period of my life where I haven't been working on art, but probably at this period of my life, through the 80s and even the 90s, I was immersed. I was an artist. I was like, this is what I do. This is what I'm going to do. This is I'm going to create things. And so I was constantly reading histories of art movements and looking at art and just wallowing in art.
Yeah.
And so, I was completely immersed in the idea of art, trying to come into contact with different types of transgressive art, because I've always been attracted to not just normal art, but art that tries to push boundaries and transgress.
Yeah.
So I was completely up to my eyeballs.
Hell yeah.
Being an artist. I'd started collecting. I mean, I've always had a range of interests, so I'm not going to try to what were your your influences? I hate that, because I can never.
Oh yeah.
I'll think of 5, and then I'll think of 5 more when I'm in the shower. I'll be, I meant to say those.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I can never say them all.
Yeah.
So basically, at that time, I was completely immersed in 20th century avant-garde art.
Okay.
And one of the things that had caught my interest was mail art. This was the height of it.
Yeah. The heyday of zines and zine culture, right?
This is when it's kind of when it was really going at the height. And so one of the things that happened in the 80s is we as a culture got access to something that had been around for a while, but it wasn't publicly accessible until then, which was Xerox machines.
Right. Okay.
They were around in the corporate culture. They were expensive. They weren't that good. And then the technology had developed a bit, and they became publicly accessible, and you started having copy shops show up. And this allowed a new generation of people the type of freedom to publish that people must have felt with the
printing press
advent of Gutenberg.
Yeah. Wow, I feel bad that I've never considered how important the Xerox machine was.
Yeah, you had to be there.
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
Xerox machines allowed for in a lot of ways, punk culture, because we could make our own posters.
Right.
We could make our own zines.
Right.
Therefore, we were able to create our own culture.
It is like the Gutenberg press at just a much faster scale.
Yeah.
And
it was immediate.
Yeah.
That's the other thing. It was immediate. It's there wasn't a barrier to entry. Anybody could figure out how to get 100 copies of something run off on the Xerox machine.
Right.
Versus, like you don't have to do typesetting and you don't have to mix the ink and you don't have to know somebody that has a press.
Right.
Like there aren't all those barriers to entry. Like literally, I had friends that worked in copy shops that would let me in. And 24-hour copy shops were a thing at that time. Go figure, but they were. and I would go in at like 2:00 in the morning. And I don't know if you probably don't remember this. So there was these things called counters that you went up to the counter and you got a device that you stuck in the Xerox machine, and it clicked over and counted how many copies you made. And then you took that counter up to the counter and you paid for the amount of copies that you made, 5 cents, whatever it was, a copy.
Yeah.
So if you knew somebody that worked the shop, you just like because the machine wouldn't work without the counter.
Yeah, yeah.
So you got the counter device, you stuck it in, you run your poems off, and then you went up and gave it to your friend. He just put it in the reset.
Hell yeah. Yeah.
And I used to like bring my own paper in because I wanted better quality paper than they had at the Xerox shop, the copy shop. So I'd come in with reams of paper I bought at the stationery store, and I'd run like these copies of my poetry zine or whatever I was doing that week.
Yeah.
And then like he would the person behind the counter who was my friend, he'd reset it, not charge me. And then the next time I saw him like at the Poet and Patriot, I'd buy him like 5 rounds.
Hell yeah.
And so I'd get my little folded stapled zine or booklet, because I used to write poetry back then, and I would do booklets of like crazy poetry and just leave them all over the place like for free. I wasn't selling them.
Yeah, hell yeah.
And when I had bands, of course, I would do posters and so there was like all this cut up art that we were doing. This was also with the Xerox machine. If you had a pile of magazines and an X-Acto blade and a glue stick, you were able to do collage and then take the collage in and get it Xerox. So you would get duplicates of your art, collage art. And that would usually be copies of a cassette cover or copies of a zine cover or posters for your band or your friend's band. And then that was the other thing is like cassettes were also a thing at this time. So like you could also do music duplication.
Right.
And yeah, it's like when I got my first 4-track. So like Tascam had come out with a Porta 1 Studio, which was a 4-track recorder that was portable.
Yeah.
And it recorded on a cassette tape instead of a reel-to-reel and had 4-channel input. So people started doing their own music and making their own cassette covers with Xerox. And then the mail art culture was a combination of all of this. People that were doing Xerox art, people that were doing cassette art, people that were doing both, started mailing this stuff out to other people on lists. And then you would you would get on a list and then you would send along, like your name to the next list, and then they would put you on, and then all of a sudden all this stuff is coming in your mail slot.
Yeah.
That other people around the world are creating.
Yeah.
And some of them are encouraging you to add and pass along. So you had this Talmudic environment where you were like, you would get something, like somebody would send something along. Like I used to get a lot of Exquisite Corpse. So the Exquisite Corpse, Tristan and Tarza started this. The Exquisite Corpse was you would write down a line.
Oh, right. That's right. Yeah.
You would hand it to the person next to you who would write another line, who would hand it, and then you would go around the room and it would be a poem.
Right.
And then people started doing that through mail art. Like people would you get an envelope and you'd open it up and it'd say Exquisite Corpse. And then you'd look and there'd be like 15 lines written.
Yeah.
And you'd write the next line and then you'd put it in an envelope. You'd go down to the Xerox shop. You'd make 50 copies or whatever. Then you'd buy stamps and you'd mail it out to all the people on your list.
Yeah.
And then all those people would do the same thing. And so it was like this forever propagating scene of art that was going around the world all the time. And you were getting art and giving art at all times.
I'm beginning to see the seeds of something being planted.
Yeah, exactly. So this is before the internet.
Right.
right? But this was happening using snail mail. And then the Church of the Subgenius, who was a part of this culture, put out a book called High Weirdness by Mail. And in that book was a description, an address, and if you needed to send a stamp envelope or $2 or whatever you need to do, it would tell you what you needed to do. And it was like literally hundreds of these projects that you could mail to and get on their list.
That's cool. That's really cool.
And I, being who I am, sat down and wrote down every single thing in that book and went out and bought the stamps and the envelopes and did everything I was supposed to do and sent off to everything in that book to get me on their list.
So then you just had a flood of art just coming into your mailbox.
Oh, dude, like you would not, in catalogs and like all this stuff coming through my door, through my mail slot.
Amazing.
It was amazing.
Yeah.
And so like I was keeping all this stuff. I was like putting it in binders and then putting the binders in these notebooks that are like 3-ring clips. And I had those on my shelf and I had them alphabetized. And so Nick Herbert used to come over and like pull these down and look at me. He's like, "You have some of the weirdest shit in the world on your shelf, man." It's like, "Where is this crap coming from?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm on these mail lists." I think it's amazing. Like these people, and he was like in awe. He was like, "Some of these people are just amazingly talented." I'm like, "Yeah." Like even better than that, there's a culture of people that send around audio cassettes that either are doing their own original art, and you could like make they would send you a tape and you would listen to it, and if you liked it, you would put it in your tape duplication machine, which I had at the time. You would duplicate copies off and you would send it to your people on your list. So this was an early way to distribute your art without having a publisher or a gallery or an agent or any of that stuff. Like everybody was like swimming in this art.
Completely circumventing any gatekeepers.
And being influenced by it and adding to it. Like some people would send you their cassette and say, you know, add a song to this or remix the song or like, you know, tell you to do something. And you would do that and then you would send like your remix.
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah, this was all going on in the late 80s. Like all this weird stuff was like, you know, through the mail.
Yeah. There seems to be a slight, I don't want to say resurgence, but a return to that happening right now, which I appreciate.
Yeah, I've talked to a lot of people recently that told me they were doing zines.
Yeah.
And some of these people are young.
Yeah.
And I'm like, didn't even know you were old enough to know what that was.
Well, I mean, it's definitely like people do want to return to physicality in art for sure. It's like, we went too fast. And now it's just like, oh shit, we don't have actual physical copies. Like now even all the art that is being distributed, like, you know, in a DIY sense is like still gate kept by internet service providers or whatever.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
So I guess you do have to double back sometimes, but
well, that's okay. I mean, like we explored the digital realm in the outset of the digital revolution, for lack of a better term. Some of these ideas sounded good on paper.
Right.
And when in paper, I mean like, you know, literally virtually paper.
Right.
And then in practice, we found out, maybe not such a good idea.
Right.
So, for example, the idea that you could walk around with access to every song in the universe on your phone
sounds good on paper.
In theory, sounds like a good idea. And actually, in practice, to a certain extent, is nice to have.
For sure.
But I noticed one of the things I'm doing is I'm going back to collecting vinyl and CDs.
Yeah.
Or even just having copies on my own server.
Yep.
Because some of the stuff that I like is not making it over to services like Spotify.
Right.
Because it's too fringe. It's too out there. And it's just like, or there's people don't know who owns the rights anymore because the record company that put it out was like 3 guys in a garage somewhere.
Right.
Like, you know, like there's all these reasons it doesn't show up, so you don't have access to it. So you want to have access to some of that material. So like a good example, there was a band that I really loved out of Ohio called Periubu.
Yeah.
And they had a couple of the members spin off and do this project called Tripod Jimmy. And they put out a vinyl in the 80s, and then, they went back to being just playing with the Paraiba band, and good luck finding that in digital.
Yeah.
Not to be found. Therefore, not going to be on streaming services.
Right. It also, having vinyl, like a vinyl album, makes listening to an album an intentional act. You can't just get a song from, this has been said a million fucking times, but you can't just get a song from this album that you like and then a song from this other album that you like, being a DJ for yourself. You actually have to take the set of songs as a cohesive whole. You're forced to. And even it forces an intentional engaging with the media that you do get something more out of when you actually have to, just the act of taking it out of the packaging, putting it on the record player, dropping the needle, in a sort of
it's a commitment.
Yeah, in a magical ritual way, you are deciding to engage with this piece of art rather than just throw something on.
Well, not only that, but with the advent of things like the iPhone or the iPod, really the iPod first, people started doing playlists and buying singles and not buying the entire album. And in some cases, I understand the wisdom and the logic behind that, because the record industry was towards the end of their life, and I consider them dead, but towards the end of their life, or towards the end of their reign, what they were doing is they were putting all their energy into 2 singles,
right,
and slapping that on an album full of crap.
Yep.
And people were getting fed up with that. On the other hand, that did away with the understanding of an album as an entire unified piece of art,
right,
that was constructed to be listened to from side 1, song 1, to side 2, last song.
It's taking you somewhere.
The whole thing is a piece. Yeah. Nobody listens to albums anymore as a piece.
I try to. When I discover a new artist or something, I will put on an album from start to finish. I'll get through, because I want to fully commit to allowing the artist to take care of me the whole way through. You don't know what a song means outside of context,
And there are some artists that still construct an album as a piece from A to Z, although less of them do. And so you'd be forgiven for not wanting to suffer through everything that they did on this album.
Absolutely.
There's these 2 songs that I really like, and I understand that. That's always been the case.
Yeah.
But, I grew up in the era of album-oriented rock. and even later in life, when I got into some of the more avant-garde stuff, like Throbbing Gristle and people like that, it was really constructed as the entire album was a piece that was making a statement, and the songs were placed in the order that they were for a reason, and the art that went with it that came on the cover was there for a reason.
Right.
And notes were there for a reason, because the whole thing was an experience.
Yeah, there's a lot we could spin off to on that. But to bring it back, you're in this post-earthquake Santa Cruz, in this psychically disrupted space, getting weird pieces of art from God knows who or where, and having batshit insane conversations with batshit insane super geniuses and people who were on the forefront of thinking about consciousness and being. Do you remember how exactly the gears started turning as a result from all this?
Yeah, all these disparate influences that were coming at me felt like I felt like I had this idea tickling my mind that there could be some sort of unified interface that I could build that would incorporate all of them. And so I started to think about collage. I was playing around with what would now be called interdisciplinary work, or interdisciplinary thinking.
Sure.
So I was like, there's all these things that I like to do. Is there something I could do that would pull them all together?
Right.
And so the first attempt of that was a board game that I was constructing. And then I realized it was too complex, because I tried it out at some of the betas I tried out on people like what would you do, and then what would you do, and they were kind of were lost.
Yeah.
There's too many things they had to have an idea about,
right?
And sometimes they didn't. So I'm like, well, yeah, then you would go here and then you would call this phone number, and then
wow.
And then this phone number, because at the time I was programming what's called phone trees.
Okay.
Or interactive voice response.
Yeah.
And so like I'm doing this, and I'm like, I could do some real art with this. Like,
right.
You could set up a game basically where you roll some dice, and then you have to send mail to like this PO box, and then wait for it to come back. And then maybe it's got a phone number, and then you call that phone number and you interact with a voice response system. I started coming up with like, how can I have all this stuff pulled together into one place?
Yeah.
And then I realized technically I couldn't, but conceptually I could.
Right.
And so what I needed to do is I needed to come up with an idea of something that pulled it together conceptually, so you could basically live in this environment. And then like it kind of dawned on me, like that's kind of like a LARP.
Yeah.
And so I didn't play LARPs, but I had a lot of friends that did. I didn't play role-playing games, but I had friends that did.
It's interesting you weren't into it. You weren't into RPGs.
I think it was especially back then, I think it was the subject matter.
Okay. Not a fantasy guy?
That I didn't care for.
Word.
Like Dungeons and Dragons stuff has never been my thing.
Oh, interesting. I love that sword and sorcery bullshit.
Oh, yeah. And you know what? But I don't.
Yeah.
I did read The Lord of the Rings when I was young.
Yep.
All of it. And I liked it, but it just never grabbed me.
That shit obsessed. I got obsessed with that shit.
Yeah, I mean, if that stuff grabs you, then it grabs you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And awesome. It just never grabbed me. Like my taste always ran to, Kerouac and people like that. It was like more earthy.
Yeah.
Down to earth kind of stuff, and also the avant-garde art stuff. And so the sword and sorcery stuff would have been appealing to me if there was an avant-garde angle. And so I started to think like, well, I could do something like LARPing, but it could be more avant-garde.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have to be, sword and sorcery.
Right.
Just like sci-fi. I love sci-fi, but I hate rockets and ray guns sci-fi. Right. Give me some Philip K. Dick. Okay.
Yeah. Sci-fi allows for more of that avant-garde shit. I feel than like fantasy does, because fantasy is always
exactly.
Yeah.
So like I saw some sci-fi as something I could resonate with, and then I said if LARPing was done in a specific way, I think it would be appealing to me. And then I discovered a group out of Phoenix or Tucson, I think Phoenix. They were called Flying Buffalo, and they actually did something where you played role-playing games through the mail.
Oh, okay.
And they had one that was Illuminatus based, which I told Robert Anton Wilson about it, and he didn't even know they were doing it. He's like, "What? Cool. Who's that?" Yeah. And I said, "No, they're doing this thing where like you sign up, and then you get on a list, and then you start getting contacted by characters from the game, other people who are playing the game who are acting like characters. Like you start getting all this mail, and you start sending off the PO boxes, and so like this whole mail experience like happens for you that's based around the Illuminatus trilogy."
Yeah.
And I said, yes, something kind of like that, but something more immediate, because the mail thing was like you send off your letter and it could be weeks before you heard anything back, which, was kind of cool. But like, I wanted something more immediate.
More immediate and thus more like immersive and transgressive in a way. Yeah.
And, I'd started to play with bulletin board systems, and I said, that's immediate.
Right.
And phone trees were immediate. And so all this stuff kind of like stirred together in this pot.
Sure.
I'm like, okay, that would be interesting, but there needs to be like some kind of central repository of this information. And then I want to be able to do something with it that is kind of like cut up, but cut up just being printed out on pieces of paper and cut up by hand. I did that in the beginning with the game I was trying to create, the board game.
Yeah.
And it was a lot of labor.
Right. And cut up is the act of taking a piece of text and literally cutting it up to rearrange it to derive meaning from it, like fridge magnets, but with
or any kind of oracular system.
Yeah.
Like you shuffle the cards.
Right.
You're cutting it up.
Right.
You're putting it in a new order. So I mean that cut up basically like as developed by William Burroughs and Brian Geisen in Morocco, was taking newspapers, magazines, books, cutting them up into different configurations, for lack of a better term, putting them into a bag or a hat and shaking them up.
Yeah.
Taking them out and reassembling them in the order of draw. And that sounds like tarot in a way.
Yeah, very much so.
Or I Ching or any of these oracular systems. And then looking at the messages that you were getting from the other side.
Right.
And Burroughs and Geisens, noticed that they were getting some interesting messages. And sometimes they were attached to very high level synchronicities.
Right.
So I started looking at that and I was like just over, I was doing cut ups all the time. I was like, I was a cut up fanboy.
That one got you.
Yeah, that one got me. I'm like, okay, something like this, but I'd like it to be a little more digital, because at that time I'd started to work with databases and like a little light went off over my head. I'm like, is there some way I could put all this information into a database and then I could have it like cut up and come back to me? And I could just keep doing this. Like I could like have it assembled and so I mentioned that to Nick Herbert, and Nick told me like, oh, that's like the metaphase typewriter. I'm like, the what?
What the hell is a metaphase typewriter?
Yeah. So this was an experiment that he was a part of, where they did this thing where they basically had an electric typewriter that was hooked up to picking up the random generations of a decaying atom.
Yeah.
And then running through software that then picked like which letter on the keyboard it was supposed to like trigger.
And
so it was a cut up.
Yeah.
Using a typewriter.
And using just true actual randomness and using
the true randomness and not fake randomness. Yeah. Which mathematically you can fake randomicity, but like there's like a real randomicity. And so like they're actually working off of like real randomness.
Right.
And then somebody over there got the bright idea of like doing seances in the same room as this metaphase typewriter to see if they could influence what it was going to output.
Hell yeah.
And so they invited, like, again, this is the early days of physics. So they were, like Stanford Research Institute was like just right there over the hill from us. And like a lot of the people that were involved in that were living in Santa Cruz. And so there was like all this, again, like all this bleed over with Esalen and SRI and Santa Cruz. And so they were conducting these experiments with the metaphase typewriter, and they came up with the idea of like, well, who's the one person who said if they could contact us from the other side, they would? Harry Houdini said, if I can contact you, I will.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And so on the 100th anniversary of Houdini's birth, they did a seance and tried to contact him with the metaphase typewriter in the room.
Okay. Did he show up?
Well, a sentence did show up.
Okay.
They said, and they had a bunch of like, I think that through SRI, they got some people who were kind of, air quotes, legit psychics.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, like Uri Geller. And,
that whole scene, which.
Yeah. Who was the other guy? The guy who became the remote viewer guy?
Like Ingo Swann, Pat Price.
Ingo Swann. Yeah. So like those level of people they had in the room. Because they are who they are. They were able to get those kind of people. Yeah. And somebody said, will you ever contact us, to Harry Houdini? And the metaphase typewriter printed out in infinite time.
Jesus Christ.
Surrounded by gobbledygook.
You're right. I don't know what I would do if that showed up. Like that would demolish any sense of a grasp on what reality is if that happened. I probably think someone was fucking with me.
Well, I mean, like you can rationalize this. Like the people in the room influenced that on a quantum level.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. It's that simple.
Yeah. I mean, at the same time though, that's a thing. Even
and
just
of course,
that is like.
And that leads to a lot of other questions.
Yeah, and truly mind-boggling to the vast majority of people.
And I didn't care so much for my project. Am I talking to a discarnate spirit?
Right.
Or am I in a group of people that are influencing the output of a quantum random machine.
Right.
I was just interested in the results.
Right.
And then I could ask all my questions, right? So then I told Nick, like, yeah, something like that, but, and then like at the time, you know, I was at the pen on graph paper phase of the project.
Okay.
And I would just, of course, I would just like go mad with arrows and boxes and, you know, it was look like Visio on acid.
Yeah.
And I'd like with colored pencils, like I was like graphing all this stuff up and showing him, and he was just like, okay, calm down. He's like, yeah, you could probably do something like that, but I don't understand everything about this software that you're talking about. But yeah, it seems to me like principle wise, you're on the right path to do something like the Metaphase typewriter, but more confined to software.
Yeah.
So I had this idea that just popped into my head, is that there are books that exist in the ethers that I could get access to. So some people might call them the Akashic Records, but I had a bigger idea.
Yeah.
I had this idea of like, there are books that exist only in the ether.
Sure. That
wait for somebody to access them and draw them down and write them and bring them into existence in this plane.
I mean, that's, you hear artists talk about that so much, like the stories already exist or the song already exists or whatever. And I just had to pull it out, and you were looking for a like technological way to do that.
Yeah.
That's so fucking interesting.
Because I had experienced that as an artist as well. Right. It's like I would write things and like be like, where did that come from?
Yeah.
Or I would draw something because I used to paint. I would draw and paint, but where did that come from? And I felt like it didn't come from me. It came through me.
Right. Yeah.
I got in the zone, and the zone allowed me to tap into, again, we're talking about like this other place that you can tap into where you become one with that thing. And then what comes out of that is a combination of something else and you as the vehicle. And now you've birthed this new thing, this new piece of art.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just like, you know, mom and dad have sex and then baby is born.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah. That's a pattern that fucking repeats throughout every level.
Yeah. And Burroughs and Geisen had pointed out that like what happens when you're doing cut-ups together as two people is like this third mind arises.
Yeah.
And this third thing arises. So Burroughs and Geisen pointed out, they called it the third mind. Process Church of the Final Judgment actually called it the third mind. So there's this thing that happens when two or more people get together and start working with creativity.
Yeah.
That this overmind arises out of the union of the two or more minds that is independent. I mean, it's made up of elements of the minds that are causing it to happen and going to interact with it.
Of course.
But it's also independent. Again, it's back to that original thing we were talking about where is it – here's a good way to put it. What I was doing in Nokian, I was talking to an angel, spirit, after having done like a half a day's worth of ritual.
Yeah.
To get this in the right place on the right time and my mind in the right place. And I had a scryer with me. Like I was doing the whole D. Kelly thing.
Yeah.
And I asked this entity, are you from my mind or are you from somewhere else? Are you objective or subjective?
Right.
And the entity said both.
Yeah. And which makes a weird sort of sense when you think about it as like a higher order type of entity, for lack of a better term. It's like, yeah.
It's the third mind. Yeah. It's you're doing everything you need to do to get in the zone. You're getting in the zone. The other entity is stepping forward and meeting you halfway.
And you're completing a circuit. And
now the circuit is complete and there's the third mind.
Yeah.
There's the emergent property.
Yeah.
Of what's about to happen.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's
fucking fascinating.
That's where I was at this time, and on top of it, through the mail art movement, I'd come into contact with like this really underground, hardcore anarchist art movement.
Okay.
Out of Madison, Wisconsin, called Dreamtime Village.
Okay.
And they had a barn. So basically what they had done, is like during the 80s, you probably you weren't around. So, but during the 80s, there was a bunch of farm foreclosures.
Okay. Yeah.
That's why Willie Nelson did Farm Aid.
Okay. Yeah. Gotcha.
I think John Mellencamp did part of that too. So like basically they were trying to help the farmers because like all these big food conglomerates were like buying up the mom and pop farms that were being foreclosed on because you couldn't make money as a mom and pop farm anymore. So they were going bankrupt, and all that land was being bought up by giant food conglomerates like Monsanto. And so Dreamtime got a couple people together and bought some of this land that was foreclosed farmland outside of Madison, Wisconsin, and put together an art collective. And part of the Dreamtime Village was something that they put together called Zazazio Endarchy, which quite literally, and I only know this because I was told, is there was a barn full of liberated Xerox machines.
Hell yeah.
That you could go to and make Xerox art. Yeah.
That's cool.
And through that, I started to come into contact with like all these really weird I shouldn't say weird, weird with a Y, underground writings that I probably wouldn't have come into contact with at a normal bookstore.
Right.
Like maybe at the Anarchist Book Collective in San Francisco, and a couple of weird bookshops in Santa Cruz. But like for the most part, you're definitely not going to see this stuff at Barnes and Noble.
No, you're not.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like this is like all this weird pirate stuff.
Yeah.
There was like pirate radio was becoming a thing. I was like on the shortwave channels and hearing like all this weird pirate stuff that was happening.
Yeah.
So like there was like this big kind of post-punk movement that was happening. It's like everybody who was like in the punk movement kind of like started to do things. They're like, well, let's not just talk about it. Let's not write about it. Let's do it.
Right.
Let's make a place to go, like an art collective. Let's make our own radio.
Yeah.
We're making our own music. Let's make our own radio.
Yeah.
Let's start our own record label. Let's like publish our own books. Let's do our own thing. So you've got all these underground presses and even some of the book companies like Semiotext and Autonomedia and all these things had kind of like started to bubble up.
Yeah.
And so you could get ideas that were way off the reservation.
Yeah.
You could finally get your hands on this kind of thinking. So like we could meet people across the country who were thinking like us. We could make contact with them.
Right.
And they could make contact with us. And this was like right at the doorstep of bulletin board systems had just started to happen.
Yep.
And the internet was going to happen, but it had not yet happened.
Right.
At least not publicly. And so through my contact through Zazazio Endarchy, I started to get things in the mail. And one of the things I started to get in the mail was something called Chaos, the Broadsheets of Ontological Anarchism, which later was bound together in a book called Taz, Temporary Autonomous Zone. But at this time, they were just broadsheets, like once a week or 2 weeks or something, like this stuff would show up in my mailbox.
Yeah.
And I was like, when I started reading this stuff, I'm like, oh, fuck yeah.
Yeah.
Like, yes, this is what I'm talking about. Like, this is like doing stuff and taking it into our own hands and actually, like Armo Food, doing these things, like actually doing things.
Yeah. Having a tangible impact, creating a space. Yeah.
Creating art in public spaces without permission. These kind of things started to like show up in these writings. And I'm like, I'm so down with whoever this is. And it was like, the author's name was Hakeem Bey. Later, I found out that wasn't his real name, but that was the pen name he was using.
Yes.
And I started to read this stuff and I showed it to Nick Herbert. Never in my wildest dreams. Because like I said, Nick was not a political or literary person.
Right.
And I showed him this and he goes, oh, yeah, I know him. He's my sheikh. I'm like, what? You're what?
You're fucking what now?
Yeah, you're what now? He's like, oh, he inducted me into the Morris Orthodox Church. The what?
Yeah.
It's like, so he sat me down and told me like, this is who this guy is. This is his real name, Peter Wilson. Like, he's a friend of mine, blah, 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 blah. I can introduce him. I'll give you his phone number. Tell him I told you to call. Okay. So I called him and we started talking.
Interesting.
And like, we talked for years.
Interesting. That is more just absolute insane synchronicity. That's just,
again, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's just so much.
And then one day he comes over and he goes, "Hey, I got some stuff that you might like." And it's like this loose couple of papers. And he hands it to me and it says it's a book catalog. And I'm just like, I'm reading it. And it wasn't as fleshed out as it is now.
Sure.
This was like the inception.
Okay.
This was like the kind of like the notes, the ideas of like, you know, like I read it and I'm like, okay, this is like a Borges thing.
Right.
This is like a fake book catalog, and like, you know, like, which I love Borges. And I'm like, yeah, I get this. I totally get this. He's like, well, this is Peter. Peter did this. I'm like, okay. I see where he's going with this. I got some ideas. And I called Peter. I said, Peter, this thing that you're doing, this book catalog thing you started. Yeah. I'm like, I have some additions and I have some ideas. He's like, well, that's the spirit of it. Let's do it. Because, you know, it was intended for mail art.
Yeah.
And so that's where it started. The project started
so
there.
So for the folks at home, what was the title of this book catalog that you received?
Incunabula, a catalog of rare books, manuscripts, and curiosa conspiracy theory, frontier science, and alternative worlds. And the funny thing about it was, and at this time it was like page and a half, I think.
Yeah.
I was looking at this. I'm like, okay, I've got some stuff on my shelf that I think is going to make a great contribution to this catalog. And some of the things that were listed, because at the time it wasn't even fleshed out yet. It wasn't what it became. It was just like, it was almost like the napkin ideas, like on the napkin ideas.
Yeah.
Like this is kind of where it will go and what it'll look like. And I'm like, okay, yeah. And I've got this shelf full of shit that will fit right in here.
Yeah. Throughout this whole process, it's this like emergent collaborative mimetic network of people. Like, it's do you ever feel weird about like being having one person and having that one person be like called the author of Ong's Hat? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I am the author of the ARG.
Yeah.
And I am the author of a lot of the material. Mm-hmm. But yeah, like the story about, if you look in Wikipedia, there's a story, like it's mostly right. It's like, it was started by four core people.
Okay.
Kind of. It was really started by 2 core people and 2 ancillary people.
Okay.
Because there was, and as far as if you were to like do it by division of labor, it was definitely 80% me.
Okay. Yeah.
But I don't think like that. So the ideas came from 2 core people with 2 other people giving us a lot of input.
It's like, what I'm getting at is like it was another sort of cut up in a way, like the germination of it.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Like, so for example, you know, like some of the things that were contributed to this process was like me and Nick Herbert sitting down and having this mythical meeting at Adelita's in Boulder Creek, California. Well, we did have that meeting.
Right.
We did eat gorditas and drink Tecate. And we basically did back of the napkin ideas of like what that conversation would look like. And then I took it away and wrote it up.
Yeah.
And then published it through Boing Boing. And then I just kept collecting this stuff as I created it. And then eventually, you know, like years later, I did the ARG, and that was the material for the ARG.
Right.
It was all the stuff that I put together along the years. But this was the beginning of the idea, like, okay, there's going to be this thing, and we didn't even know what this thing was going to be.
Yeah.
But it was this thing that was pointed in this direction. And we already knew that we all like conspiracy theory.
Yep.
You know, most people knew that I had a vast, weird collection of things that were not available to the average person, you know.
The lore.
I mean, I used to send, like, I had the Bob Lazar stuff that I bought for $2 from a P.O. box in Las Vegas, Nevada that was typed up and Xeroxed and sent to me in a manila envelope. It wasn't even bound as a book.
Amazing.
Or even it wasn't even in a ring binder. It was just loose paper.
Oh, wow.
That didn't even have page numbers on it. And I bought it for $2 or something, and I got this thing, and like I looked at it, I'm like, okay, I better keep this in order.
That's incredible.
And so like the first thing I did is I took it down to the copy shop, and I had them drill 3 holes in it and put it in a ring binder.
Yeah.
And then I like started reading this. I'm like, what the fuck is this? This is crazy shit.
Yeah.
The Dulce thing, the Dulce stuff, the same thing. I bought it for $2. It came to me like as a ream of paper that was not bound in any way. Yeah. And so I had to like drill holes in it and put it in this was all the stuff that was on my shelf.
That's so okay. Yeah.
Like nobody knew about this stuff yet.
Oh, wow.
Except for like supremely weird underground people like me.
Yeah.
And there weren't many of us around.
Oh.
So I was like the high pope of weirdness.
Oh, fuck. Yeah, you were. I'm just kind of seeing how the kind of dominoes fell a little bit. You know what I mean?
I was the right person at the right time at the right place.
Wow.
And yeah, there were other people around the world that were into the high weirdness like I was.
Sure. You were in,
and there were people that were into segments of the high weirdness. Like I had friends that were like so far down the Kennedy conspiracy, the Kennedy assassination conspiracy rabbit hole. They knew infinitely more than I did.
Yeah.
So I would go to them if I had Kennedy assassination conspiracy theory questions because they were more versed in that.
And with like the burgeoning internet and shit, like you were just kind of having all that lore before the rest of the public, being in the place that you were, thinking about the type of art that you were right in the position to make a big old splash in this new space that was about to develop. Just about to develop, and we were actually going to be the people that were developing that space. Right. So yeah, you were. What we dragged along with us is the love of this. Yeah. Lore. So people often wonder why the early web and the early internet was so full of this kind of woo. Because you guys loved it. That was your shit. Because we dragged it with us. Like we were the ones that were doing the tech work to make all this possible. Right. And so consequently, what we would put online for our amusement would be all this stuff. Right. Wow. There was a name for this. It was called shovelware, which is basically all the stuff that you had in print that you would put in digital form. Right. And this was before OCR was available. Mm-hmm. So we had to type this shit by hand. Jesus Christ. So a lot of stuff that's on the early internet came from me and friends of mine that were sitting up overnight and like drinking Jolt Cola and typing this stuff by hand. And so consequently, you see like every once in a while you see like, because like people like me are not a great typist. And so, consequently you would see typos right in this stuff. And then I would see some of this stuff years later and I'd be like, that's mine. I knew the typo. Okay. And there was even a conspiracy theory that was that people like that saw the print stuff and then saw the digital stuff said that some of the digital stuff was purposely altered. Right. But I happen to know that it wasn't. It's just that I'm a shitty typist. Right. But of course. Because I never took typing classes. Yeah. Of course that's what they thought, though. That's so funny. It was so funny. Years later, I saw people like opining about, well, I actually got my hands on the print thing. And I'm thinking, you got your hands on the print thing because I scanned it and put it online. But okay, whatever. Yeah. And so but I noticed the print thing and the digital thing is different. Well, there's two reasons for that. One is up until 1999, the documents were forever evolving. Right. It wasn't until 1999 when everybody else dropped out of the project. Everybody had dropped out of the project I'd say 92, 93 is when everybody besides me dropped out. Mm. When I took it digital, everybody kind of went, Yeah. Nobody wanted that. And I'm like, okay, I got it. I got the ball. I'm running. And then by 1999, when I published the CD-ROM, that's when I said, okay, I'm not going to make any more changes. I'm going to call code freeze. Right.
And so people that saw the evolution over the years, like people that found the way old stuff like on Temple of the Screaming Electron and some of the early BBS stuff, they said, well, that's different than like, well, of course it is, because it was like always was I was always adding, deleting, and improving, trying to at least changing.